probably because there was no one else on the path today, but I started to get this bad feeling in my stomach. The one everyone has a hard time describing, but most people know too well. Something wasn't right. But by this time, I was already well along my shortcut, and I decided to blame my feelings on me being paranoid, which is really not uncommon of me. I kept an eye on him out of my peripheral vision walking by, and he continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious to me, so I continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters away when the guy stopped talking on the phone, and I felt an even bigger feeling of dread in my gut. I turn around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth and a brown glass bottle. Before I had a second to register what the fuck he was doing, his head shoots up in my direction, and the look in his eyes is a terrifying mix between "I've been caught" and "I'm not stopping now." He drops everything, leaving his shit behind, and starts sprinting straight for me, cloth in hand. At this point, I'm too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me in the low-lying woodland with this crazy fuck, and I'm too far away to scream bloody murder. My first instinct in that split-second decision is to run towards my neighborhood. I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack on the ground and sprinting as fast as I could, starting up the hill toward my neighborhood. Judging by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in two with no effort, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Plus, I didn't know what the fuck he had in his hand. All throughout school, I had been the top cross-country and track runner in my entire school out of the female and male teams. My running had been my savior on a few other creepy occasions, but soon into the chase, I knew it wouldn't be enough this time. This guy was fucking fast as shit, and I could tell he was slowly gaining on me without even looking back. I finally see some fenced backyards up ahead, and I'm hoping people are home from work. I start trying to scream help as much as I could with my out-of-breath and useless voice. I make a split-second decision to start jumping fences of people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills are shittier than his running. The first fence throws him off, but by the second into the next yard, he is on my ass and I feel him coming insanely close to grabbing my leg. I am shitting myself at this point. I see no cars in driveways, no sign of anyone home, and the only thing that is keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state is thinking that I may not ever see my family or friends again. The next yard belongs to people I know rather well, including their dog. Necessary background information. This house was close to my street on the street parallel to mine, and I have come to know their dog rather well since they recently moved in. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I would walk to school with her on the street down the hill to the busy street. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac. Usually, when kids were walking to school, they would put him in the backyard instead of their front yard since he would growl and scare the shit out of the kids walking by while he was tied outside. I love animals, so every time we'd walk by, I'd talk calmly to him through his menacing "I'll fuck you up" barks. Every time I did this, he'd be slightly less vicious to me, until one day the nice people who lived there gave me a treat to give to him, and after that, the dog was a nice stop on the way to school. The dog's name is Leo. With that next yard and my newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt hope like I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they let him out in their backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo saw me frantically running toward him, he started wagging his tail, then looked to the guy chasing close behind me and he started growling. I thought this would be enough to get the guy to fuck off, but no. He started to jump over the fence the second after I did, but the dog jumped up and his teeth came so close to his face that the creep fell backwards into the other yard straight on his ass, right as I fell into the dog's yard on my ass. The creep and I stared at each other out of breath for a few seconds while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was assessing if he could take on the dog or not. I prayed that the creep didn't have a knife or something like that. The guy looked angrier than I've ever seen a person, and after a few seconds, got up and started running back down the hill from where we came. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock and couldn't move, until my hero started licking on my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what just went down. My house was so close, I jumped the fence and ran the rest of the way home and called the cops to investigate and try to find the guy. I gave them the best description I could after coming practically face to face with him. The dude's bag was gone, and so was every trace of him. They found my poor backpack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me they'd keep looking. Never saw the guy again, and I didn't hear anything more about it, and after calling the police a few more times, I gave up. They told me during that time they had received sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, etc., but nothing like mine. Over the next few months, there were a few missing person cases, but in a city like the one I'm from, not the worst, but not the best, you could never connect anything like that for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, the more fucked up it is, and the more confused I am. First, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch me into the forest before I had the chance to get away, or before another trail goer possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon on him or anything except that creepy cloth. And what the hell did he have in his hand? A friend thought it may have been chloroform, but I did research on it, and apparently it's more a myth that pouring it onto a rag and covering a person's face causes them to faint very quickly. Plus, where the hell would you get that anyway? Thanks to that asshole, I never walked the shortcut anymore without at least 2 friends and pepper spray or some sort of protection. Hey everyone, first off, thanks for watching the video. This was a pretty cool topic for me to do because I've had some pretty similar things happen to me personally before. Maybe one day I'll even do a video on my own personal experience. Hey everyone, so coincidentally, as I was recording for this video, a fan messaged me letting me know that a friend of his is missing. He was last seen leaving for a job on Craigslist in his mother's 2006 black Ford 500, and I know it's a long shot, but I want to help in any way I can. If you live anywhere near Saudi Daisy, Tennessee, sorry if I butchered the name of that, and you have seen this man, please contact the police department. I will leave links in the description with more information on the case, but he's been missing for about a month now. Now, let's get to the stories. Number 1. This happened about a year ago now. I am a college student and I was basically forced to move out on my own, which I didn't mind, but that meant finding a new roommate, which can be a daunting and scary experience. I've had a few weird encounters, but I think this one takes the cake. I posted on Craigslist looking for a bedroom in a shared house or apartment for $300 or less, and on my ad I had mentioned, please no phone calls, only texts or email, because I find being on the phone with someone I haven't had a chance to size up a really uncomfortable situation. I'm just an awkward person, I guess. Anyway, I get a call from a dude who clearly didn't read the no calls part, which I mentioned because this type of phone call was exactly the reason I don't like to talk to strangers on the phone. At first, he was just pleasant and normal, told me he had a room available and relevant information like that. We started to talk about when and where we'd meet up, and he started going on tangents about random stuff. I'm a combination of too interested in deep conversation and too awkward to end the call when it started to get weird. So this call went on for about 2 hours and we talked about the meaning of life and all kinds of weird shit. Honestly, this should have been the red flag and I shouldn't have met him, and of course I also should have grown a pair and told him I needed to leave. So he wants me to meet him at his place and show me the room. I've since learned that you should really insist on meeting in public first. I got to his neighborhood and it was run down on a level that made the ghetto I grew up in look nice. Saggy front porches, hot cracked concrete, sad people with old beat up Lincolns. You get the picture. His house blended right in. The yard was seriously overgrown and the front door didn't even work. So I went around the back, and just looking at the guy standing in the doorway and seeing the kitchen behind him was enough to make me realize I really just wanted to leave. There's no way in hell. The guy in the doorway was a man with a sort of clown-style afro. He was leaning on a cane on his right side. His eyes looked crazy and the house smelled musty from 10 feet away. Again, I'm a coward, so instead of trusting my gut, I go inside and I'm polite, thinking, it's okay, it'll be over in 20 minutes and I can get the fuck out. I don't know what made me think this man, who had a 2-hour conversation with me on the phone about life and philosophy, would let me get away that easily. He took me up a flight of creaky steps into a small bedroom with no door and a mattress on the floor. I thought, no way in hell would I live with a 40-something-year-old man and have no door on my bedroom, but it was a moot point because my mind was made up before I even saw the room. I wouldn't have lived there for free, let alone for $200 a month. Things got weird. He tried to hold me hostage with conversation again. I think he was lonely. He talked about how some of his family members were millionaires. He might have been delusional, the whole story seemed made up. Then he told me this story about an 18-year-old girl that has also checked out the room and tried to have sex with him or something, and told me about how his mom hated white people. He was black and I was white, and it sounded like he sympathized with her. Obviously that was super awkward and uncomfortable. Eventually I was able to find a break in conversation and plucked up the courage to make up an excuse to leave. I was never so happy to leave a place in my life. I don't know that he was necessarily a criminal or anything, but he really gave me the fucking creeps. Number 2. I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance from me. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get what I need. I needed to buy a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already have. So, I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. As a student, I prefer to go for the cheap option. Craigslist usually provides that. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good-looking bag at only £15. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately, what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. I'm still not even sure. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live, but when I told him the area I was from, he reluctantly offered to come to my house to give me it. This all seemed strange, being that the sale was only for £15. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my fucking address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m. I was thinking that he wasn't going to come, but at around 10:20, there was a guy at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window to see the front door, just to be sure. And sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a backpack in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened it up. It was the guy on the phone for sure, the accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out £30 because of the trouble he went to come here and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him and he left. I was still so confused that he came all this way just for £15, but I didn't find it overly strange. And boy was I wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut, which was really weird for this time of the night, and in my area, the nearest house is like a quarter-mile away and I rarely see the people that even live there. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had, but he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I fucking nearly shit myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door is, staying low to avoid whoever it was from seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, I see a security light turning on in the back garden. It's a motion sensor that turns it on. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face with no teeth showing. Just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa dude, what the fuck are you doing back here?" He said nothing and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in and I took the keys from the back door, then bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he's probably making his way into my house. I made a turn to go up the stairs towards the bathroom so I could lock myself in there. When I was in the bathroom, I heard him stumbling and broken glass falling to the floor. He was in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999, told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get the officers out to me as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would get there generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I screamed, "The police are coming, just back the fuck off, man." After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I even had. Then in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors open outside and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open and then someone shout, "Police, drop the knife." Again, I felt sick knowing he even had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs, and then I heard a taser go off and the guy scream. And then I heard a thump. They eventually arrested him. I have pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he will be free to come right back. I am now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible. Number 3. Hi, my name is Tom and I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a horror story about something that happened to me that almost fucked up my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend who I had been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily. I also began looking for any girl I could find to rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I began talking to her and we arranged to meet up. To make a long story short, we had sex and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35 and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment and enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I wanted. To be honest, I kind of used this lady and used her as a sugar mama for lack of better word, I guess. After a while, she grew really attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said she wanted to do this to help me out so she could get me on her insurance so I can get help from my drug and alcohol problem, which I refused to consider. One day we got into a big argument and she told the police that I had been abusing her and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out, saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all this other stuff, and said she wanted to come pick me up to buy some dope and alcohol and get me something to eat, and being the addict I am, I of course accepted. From the moment she picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative and was always on my ass wanting to talk to me about this and that, but on this day she was oddly quiet. When we got back to her apartment, after I walked in, she immediately pushed me on the couch, and to make another long story short, we had sex again. But something odd happened. She was angry that I had used protection. I had been getting bad vibes off of her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked her for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to do. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and I sat down with my sister and watched some SpongeBob with her. About 10 minutes after I was home, I got a call on the phone. I picked up the phone, and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said, "This is the St. Louis County Police Department. We're going to need you to come outside to talk to you." I ran downstairs and hid my weed and my pills and then walked outside to figure out what the hell was going on. When I walked outside, there were about 7 different cops on my porch, and they were all pointing tasers and guns at me. One of them hit me in the back of my leg with a nightstick and put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom and got permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and my basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on whenever I would ask a question like why they were doing this. They just told me I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me. Apparently this lady had accused me of kidnapping her and raping her. She told the police that she had come by my house to return some of my stuff because we had just broken up, that I had held a knife to her throat and forced my way into her vehicle, and then took her back to my apartment where I raped her repeatedly. Thankfully, I had remembered that we made a couple stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way that I could have kidnapped her. Unfortunately, the police still swabbed my dick for DNA, and they also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the night in the St. Louis County Jail wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady began constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers and either crying into the phone or just to beg to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighborhood, even though she lives nowhere close to me. I called the police about this a couple times, but they didn't really seem to care. They just told me I would have to get a restraining order on her in order to make her stop. I wanted nothing to do with the court system though, because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her and hope that the problem would go away. After a couple months, she finally did stop bothering me as much. However, to this day, sometimes I get calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from blocked numbers. And of course, every new girlfriend I get, she messages them on Facebook and tells them about how I raped her. Moral of this story, be careful who you meet online, whether you're a guy or a girl. All it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life. I used to work as a third-party contractor in the convention area of the Swan and Dolphin Resort/Hotel. Sometimes we would have to be there at really odd hours for convention setup/teardown. One morning, I was there about 30 minutes before the union laborers, probably around 3:30 a.m.-ish. I also would like to point out that I used a couple of dating apps at the time, Grindr, Scruff, and Growler. The apps I use also have that location indicator that tells you how far away they were. All of a sudden, some guy whose profile was blank except for a blurry close-up of his shirt, collar, and neck started blowing up my phone on 2 different apps at the same time. I basically replied that I was at work and busy and may be available to possibly chat later. He started sending really creepy messages like, "Oh, I see you working," and other semi-stalkerish messages. I shut down the apps. I have a small office located across from one of the convention halls. I holed up in my office and told the union guys to check in with me there when they arrived. Once they got there, I felt more safe, so I set up my desk out on the convention hall's floor and just continued with my work. Around noon, I launched up the apps again to pass time during my lunch break. As if he had been waiting for this moment, he started chatting me up again from locations like 200 feet away. I told him he seemed a bit creepy and that I wasn't interested. He stopped, or so I thought. A few weeks later, I had a late night teardown around 10 p.m.-ish. As soon as I got to my office, he appeared again and started messaging me. His messages didn't seem creepy at first. Just simple things like, "Hey, how are you? You busy?" I got really creeped out and blocked him. He would then just create new profiles and continued to message me for months. The messages quickly transitioned after the first time I blocked him. He switched to saying things like, "You can't block me every time. I know where you work so I can find you again. Why won't you answer me? I deserve an answer." Later, he would just send creepy messages like, "I found you again. It looks like you're working hard. Are you alone right now?" I always believed in the "don't feed the trolls" adage and refused to engage with him, blocking him every time. He would generally only message me when I was working very early or very late, with occasional day messages while I was working the convention center floor. Convention centers are giant, wide-open spaces when no events are going on, which can really add to the creepiness. But what's worse is when there were events happening. I mean, the floor is crowded with people. Hundreds, if not thousands of people, all of which could be this odd mystery man. I never really felt safe, but I can't describe the heart-sinking feeling I had when, in late July, he sent me the final messages that sent me to report him to hotel security and my own company seeking help. Here's where the unexplained part comes in for me. After putting up with this for a long time, he ended it abruptly by sending me photos of me at my desk in my office from the first day he messaged me. Let me describe my office a bit for you. My office is tiny, maybe 30 to 35 square feet. We have 2 desks set up on one side with computers and an empty table in the corner opposite my desk. The rest of the office is filing cabinets and a printer opposite the empty table. The photos seem to be coming from a part of the office where we have the extra table. It's generally an empty table without any electronics on it that we use for anyone visiting the office or to lay out floor plans. I was absolutely freaked out to say the least, but I can't imagine how he had gotten the photos. After turning over the photos, all of the messaging abruptly stopped just as suddenly as it had started. I was a 28-year-old Army veteran, and I can honestly say that I wasn't nearly as brave as I thought I would be in a situation like that. In that moment, I turned into a child afraid of letting my feet hang out of the covers for fear that a monster would grab whatever exposed portion he could get a hold of. The thought that a stranger was stalking me from an app is terrifying. But what scares me even more is the possibility that it could have been somebody who I regularly pass by at work. Someone who makes small talk with me and says hi in passing, who then the next minute is sending me anonymous creepy messages. After all, I never did find out who it was, and I guess I'll never know. This happened in June of 2016. I have celiac disease, a disease where gluten is detected as an allergy and your body attacks itself trying to kill the gluten. Thus, my intestines are extremely damaged and sometimes bloody or infected. The reason I was in the hospital was because of me being a dumbass and eating a bunch of bread, so my intestines got really messed up. Basically, I had to go to the hospital to get some pictures taken of my intestines. This story takes place when they were extremely damaged and bloody. I was spending the night at the hospital with an IV filled with medicine to help me get better quicker or something like that. I don't really remember. The IV was attached to my stomach. I was half asleep and it was around midnight. My dad had left about an hour earlier and I was there all by myself. The hospital has a door with a window and a yellow light from the hallway was preventing me from sleeping. There was a sound of footsteps right by my door and I opened my eyes. I thought it was a nurse or something checking in on me, but it was some guy. He looked like a dad. Middle-aged, glasses, a flannel shirt. He looked really normal. But he wasn't my dad, as my dad is way paunchier, and it wasn't a nurse since nurses had their scrubs on at all times. He looked like a visitor. I was a little freaked out, but I wasn't scared yet, as I don't get scared easily. He opened my door very quietly. "Hello?" I asked, and the guy looked around nervously. He put his finger to his lips in the cartoon famous shh face. His face was stoic and his eyes looked wild. I would have either punched him or ran, but I'm connected to a liquid bag and I have a huge throbbing in my stomach. I had been under an operation of sorts earlier and I was not allowed to get up. "I'll be quick," he muttered. He quietly moved around my cot and crouched down. I didn't take my eyes off of him. Then, he fucking unplugged my IV. I was livid and I was terrified. What the fuck did he think he was doing? The IV stopped making the humming sounds as it stopped being run with electricity. These things are not meant to be unplugged. Their plugs are tough so that they don't get unplugged. He then looked at me dead in the face and said, "Fuck you." He flipped me off and left without another word. Looking back at it, it's almost kind of funny the way he said it. Like a teenager flipping off his parent, but at 15 years old I didn't think that it was funny. I was still in complete shock for 3 seconds before I screamed bloody murder. A nurse was in my room very quickly after that. I told her what happened and she just stared at me. It wasn't until she noticed he unplugged my IV that she freaked out. She plugged it back in, and I remember she stayed with me until either morning or until I fell back asleep. I don't remember what came first. There was a lot of shouting from the hall, and every time I tried to speak up, she shushed me. Eventually, I fell asleep. I wouldn't have told this story if my dad hadn't told me what happened after. Somehow, this story came up recently, and I kinda chuckled about it. My dad was quiet before he asked me if he ever told me about the end of that story. I said no. My dad told me a guy had come into the doctor's office asking to visit his friend who had gone under surgery. They didn't let him in since he was asleep and it was way past visiting hours. This man didn't listen and somehow got past the people at the front desk. They also didn't know that this guy had some kind of knife. He cut 4 people's medical wires and unplugged my IV. There was also some other guy who was sleeping and he unplugged that guy's IV too. That guy went into a coma. A fucking coma. So the police caught this guy and put him into a mental hospital. I was shaken. I had really come into contact with a full-on crazy person. What would he have done to me if I had been sleeping? I don't know. Ever since I talked to my dad, I wanted to tell this story. It may not have been very scary to anyone but me, but I was so vulnerable at the time. Who knows what he could have done if I was any more vulnerable. I hope he's getting the care he needs, or something. Like I just said, this might not make any sense or be very scary, but it freaked me the fuck out. I don't have a very strong end or moral to the story, but I don't really trust that hospital anymore. Not after some crazy guy sneaks in right under their goddamn noses. Let me set the scene for you. I was 7 and my mother was dating a man with a daughter who was about 15. Her name was Christy. While she didn't live with us, she did stay with us on some weekends. The reason this is important will come into play a little later. I grew up in a moderately isolated area in the south. My mother's house is on about 90 acres, most of it being heavily wooded. For the most part, it was quiet. The type of place most people didn't lock their doors and everyone knows each other. It was quiet until one sequence of events shook my community to its core. There was a man just 2 streets over from mine who murdered his girlfriend's entire family, including her. It was in their home over a dinner about 2 weeks before this event took place. It was also learned later that he had also murdered his mother and father in their home, as they were found after his girlfriend's family was. He hadn't been caught, and the local police were working with police in Tennessee as there had been reportings of people sighting him there. My mother had gotten a security system installed just to ensure our home was properly secured. We had alarms on every window and door in our house. On this Saturday, my mother got called into work as she was an apartment manager and there was an emergency that she needed to tend to. Her boyfriend had gone to work early that morning. My mother was very, very nervous about leaving, and due to the nature of the emergency, she thought it would be best that Christy and I stay home where we were safe. Safe, so she thought. She reluctantly left and let us know that her cell phone was always going to be on her if we needed her. Christy and I promptly set the alarm and made sure that all the doors were locked. My mother had been gone about an hour and we were deep into a Disney movie and pizza. Suddenly, the alarm started blaring. Christy and I jumped up to see what was going on. On the way to the alarm, you have to pass a very large sliding glass door. What we saw there left us frozen. There was a man prying our door open with a crowbar. He saw us, made eye contact, and quickly ran off into the woods behind my mother's house. I will never forget what he looked like, or the sinister look he had in his eyes. We called the police, and then we called my mother, who had already been alerted by the alarm company. My mother actually arrived before the police did due to how isolated we really were. When we described the man to the police, they immediately knew that it was the man that they were looking for. Of course, there was a massive investigation that day of the property and the woods surrounding us. In the woods, they found cigarette butts, lots of canned food, soda bottles, and a makeshift tent made from a tarp. The man had been living behind us the entire time, and even had been stealing food from our trash. When he was arrested, which was a few hours after the incident, he had admitted to watching our family to learn our habits, knowing that he could take advantage of the house when no one was there. Even now, as an adult, this event still follows me. Just goes to show that you really never know who's watching you. I was backpacking with my friend in the Yukon. We met this dude named Carl in Dawson at a free dinner put on by the town church. He asked my friend and I, both girls, where we were staying. We told him we were backcountry camping to play it safe, and then he went on to say that he knew the whole area like the back of his hand. He asked for specifics, and we lied and said that we were at the main campsite. We finished our dinner and tried to run out of there, but then he cornered us and offered to give us a ride back to our campsite. Luckily, we had our car, so we said no thanks and tried to make a run for it. We got to our car and started driving down the road to where we were camping. It's the Yukon, there's only a few people driving back and forth, and we took a turn onto a gravel road heading north. We realized that there's been a truck following us since we left town. And we especially notice once we're on this gravel road with absolutely no service and no emergency services. There are literally no turnoffs on this road. And even if there was, we were in prime bear territory next to a river, so running for it wasn't even worth it. My friend decided she was just going to drive faster and try to pull a fast one on Carl. So we blitzed down the gravel road until we hit snow. The whole road is covered in snow and ice, and we can't go much further in the pace that she's set. We see a campsite ahead of us, blitz it there, and park the car on the far side of the road to hopefully confuse the guy. We grab our tents, sleeping bags, food, and everything warm within our vicinity and make a run for it. We saw that the campsite had a shelter in the middle. We knew we had to get warm quickly, so the game plan was to run to the shelter, get fully dressed, and prepare to sleep in a snow embankment. However, once we got to the shelter, we bumped into a family of 12 people, 8 men and 4 women. We ran into the shelter swearing, cursing, and freaking out because we felt that that creepy Carl guy was after us. So once we turned around and saw the faces staring at us in amazement, we calmed down and tried to explain our situation. From the moment we uttered the words, "There's a man who has been following us for the last 100 kilometers," everyone stepped up. The men ran outside with their knives, hiking poles, bear spray, etc. And the women took us in and told us to run. They had seen a dense patch of trees in the northeast corner of the campsite, and knew that all of us could hide within the trees without fear of being caught. They even mentioned we could build Quincy's super quickly to hide in, but running further away felt safer. As we ran to safety, we could hear the men yelling and telling Creepy Carl to stay away. There were loud noises, a car alarm as we knew it was our car, and then complete silence. My friend and I stared at each other with tears in our eyes. We were in the northern part of the Yukon, in the snow, in negative 10 degrees Celsius weather, and we had just been followed from what we thought was just going to be a free dinner from the local church. After 30 minutes, the other women decided that it was time to return to the shelter and to find the men. We returned and found the men safe and sound. Apparently, Creepy Carl had told them that we were none of their business and that we had wronged him in some sort of manner. So he broke our car window and turned around and left. One of the guys had a car, so he had followed Creepy Carl down the road a good 15 or 20 kilometers before turning back around. The women invited my friend and I to sleep in their campsite, and we gladly obliged. We woke up the next morning safe and sound in the middle of the Yukon without cell or emergency services, and a giant appreciation for finding other humans. The following events took place around early December of 2015. It was late at night in Washington State. I wasn't home alone for these events, although at the time they occurred, I was the only one awake in my house. 1 a.m. So I'll start by saying that my family has 3 cats. They'll often stay out late, making it my responsibility to make sure that they're in, as I'm the last one to go to sleep. When our one cat, Nellie, wants to come in at night, she'll scratch her claws on the sliding screen door located behind our sliding glass door. The aforementioned door is located in the family room, the room with the TV, and the room I'm usually in late at night just hanging out alone, flipping channels and whatnot. Oddly enough, I was watching a video about deep web horror stories by my favorite YouTube narrator, this guy named Corpse Husband. I hear what I think is my cat scratching on the screen door, ready to come in. I get up, make the short 7-foot walk from the couch to the door to let her in. I open the door, expecting to see her bolt into the house as usual, but she's not there. "Nellie, come on in," I call childishly. When she doesn't appear to be there, I flip on the porch light and see nothing on the patio, no cat. I look up and just 50 feet away, I see a tall, lanky, very disturbed looking man standing near the fence line of my yard. I kind of squint and smirk and I look in confusion. It didn't take long before confusion turned into sheer terror. The man is not moving, not even acknowledging the fact that he has been discovered by me. Completely unresponsive to the encounter, almost as if he felt he was invited there openly. I instantly slam the door and run to my parents' room to wake up my parents and tell them what I just saw. It takes about a minute or two for them to become coherent and truly understand what I'm saying to them. My dad gets out of bed and scans the yard from inside. The man is gone. Tired and annoyed, my dad assures me it was my imagination and goes back to bed. I was a little angered I wasn't taken more seriously, as I know what I had seen. 1:15 a.m. 15 minutes after I first saw this man initially, curiosity got to me. I find myself looking out the door once more. Sure enough, I see the man yet again. I drop my glass of water right into the ground and I freeze in fear as my heart falls with my glass. This man is standing in my damn treehouse, up against the balcony, hands on the rail staring at me. There are a few things in particular that make this so uncomfortable. 1. This man had to be nearing 7 foot tall, yet he's incredibly bony and skinny, making his body look incredibly disproportionate. 2. I just can't see a face. I'm serious, this man's face from my point of view looked solid black. I was scared, yet so confused. I was truly puzzled. I go to my parents' room and wake them up yet again. This time, I'm taken more seriously. My mother calls 911. A sheriff's deputy shows up about 30 minutes later and looks around. He finds nothing and assures us that this man that I've seen has left, but I don't have the same feeling. After the deputy leaves, it's about 2 a.m. and by 2:15 my parents are back in their bed and I'm still on the couch in the family room. 2:25 a.m. I hear a loud bang coming from the window, which I'll put a picture of on screen right now. If you look in the picture, you'll see a stained glass picture hanging from the window. This bang was so loud and forceful that picture was swung back and forth. Again, I awake my parents and we huddle in the family room together in fear, not knowing what to do next. When all of a sudden, bang, the bang happens again, just inches from us standing there. Whoever this is must be one bold son of a bitch, we're all thinking. We turn on the porch light seconds after and the man is gone. Damn it! We call the police yet again, and after an hour and a half, 3 sheriff's deputies are now here. They look around. Well, there's nothing here, they say. Well, no shit, this happened almost 2 hours ago, we're all thinking. After this, we all give up and decide to try and get some sleep. What we found in our yard the next morning was chilling and just so uncomfortable. Footprints. But these footprints weren't normal footprints. The attached images on screen right now are the actual photos taken that morning. They were about 1 foot long each. Very narrow and no tread. That's what was the weirdest part. You'd think that the imprint of the shoes would be left. Nope. Flat. What was also strange was that the area where the prints are, there were a lot of leaves. Yet, where his feet were, they appear to be gone. Very eerie. Although I never saw the man after this, we did find another incredibly creepy piece of evidence. Our house crawl space. A crawl space is a small hole located around the perimeter of your house that leads underneath your house. Maybe around 5 feet wide, usually covered by a wooden sheet. Well, ours was clearly tampered with after that night, pretty severely. It was moved, uncovered, and tossed around. Keep in mind, this cover is heavy and on top of it was our wheelbarrow. Not an easy setup to rearrange. Anyways, we haven't seen this man again or had signs of his presence. I still live in slight fear of finding him. What makes it so strange is that whoever this was wasn't at all deterred by being discovered, nor scared off by the presence of law enforcement. We've nicknamed this intruder Thin Man. I hope I never see him again.
I was home alone. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in the Cape Cod. It was about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made me some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever, and I had some money to order a pizza if I wanted to. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up kinda late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I kinda threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go a bit mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter, whatever, when I hear the front door open. The bathroom's directly up the stairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud whenever it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained in trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower and wrapped my towel around myself and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. And the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, they're kind of tight and walled in a way where I can't exactly see into the kitchen while I'm going down them, but it's a long story. But regardless, my house is kind of old, and despite that, I tried so desperately to walk down my stairs, and yet each step made a very, very loud creak. I mean, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took like 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs. So, when I get to the second to last stair, right before I can see around the corner into my kitchen, I took a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise, and there's no reason for them to even still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in my house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I chuckled at myself for being so stupid and just normally walked down the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. And yet, standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me. Perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. Just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed. Even had them lifted up and a little behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it was just so abnormal. I don't get it. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. I mean, looking back now, I can realize how fucking creepy the situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step toward him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. And I put my chair up against the doorknob like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and, nearly in tears, I told the operator what had happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, I was in a fetal position, staring at the door, praying that a cop would be here soon. I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside my door. And there's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear. Just watching the shadow across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying that man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir, are you there? Hello?" But I didn't want to make a noise. And even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, I turned to the gap and I heard the faintest of footsteps, slowly creaking down the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes, and I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. Soon after, I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened the door to the 2 of them and stood there almost crying. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me alone anymore. Thank God. And I check every lock in the house now before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still, but I'm doing alright. I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found who the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine, though. Whenever I look outside, I half expect to see him just standing there under a lamppost, just looking my way. I have no idea what he wanted, or who he was. But regardless, be alone anymore.
This happened to me in 2006 when I was 16. I was at the peak of my high school year, played football with my best friends, and drove a 2002 Chevy Avalanche, although I only had a learner's permit. On November 14th, my cushy high school life was altered by a scary dose of reality. It was a normal Tuesday morning, and I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to finish some homework. My mom left at about 6:45 to take my little sister to school and said she would come back around 7:25 to take me. I went downstairs to turn the music up on my cheap-ass radio that was loud as fuck for some reason, and I got in the shower around 6:55. The music was still super loud even from where I was in the shower upstairs. My hand was inches away from the nozzle that turned the water on when suddenly, the music stopped. Somewhat confused, I stepped out of the bathroom and peeked around the corner to look at the radio. I was about to go turn it back on when a hand with a black glove reached over and pulled the cord out of the socket. It was like somebody had hit me in the gut with a baseball bat. I stepped back, terrified at what I had just witnessed. Across the hall from the bathroom is a closet where we keep the towels and soap. I grabbed my phone and went into the closet as quietly as possible and locked myself in, my phone glued to my hands. I was in such shock that I couldn't even think straight. All I could hear were three men talking back and forth, plastic bags shuffling and glass and other items breaking. I was about to call the police when I thought of my mom. She would be home any minute now, and the thought of what they might do to her terrified me. I called her and these were my exact words.
Mom, okay, listen to me. 3 or 4 men just broke into the house and are robbing the place. I'm upstairs in the back closet and have the door locked. Park at the neighbor's house and call the police now.
Now, being a parent myself, I can imagine the fear she must have felt during that. In a shaky, terrified voice, she just said okay and hung up the phone. She was only about 3 minutes away but promised to rush back as fast as she could. Now it was just me and the unwanted house guests. I decided to call the cops too and told them the situation. Police were on their way, but our house was further out than most. Deep down, I knew it would take them a bit longer. I heard them, the robbers. There now had to have been 4 or 5 of them. I'm not bragging by all means, but we do live in a bigger house and the downstairs is where all the bedrooms, living room, and kitchen are. This includes my dad's office where he had computers for work and stuff. Minutes passed that felt like hours and I could hear them getting closer to me. A couple of them were at the end of the hallway and I heard footsteps. Mere feet from the closet. I actually looked back on my life thinking that I was going to die. 2 dark shadows appeared at the bottom of the closet door. Tears now began pouring down my face knowing that I might actually get shot or kidnapped. Even though I was a pretty big guy, standing at 6'2", 250 pounds, I was definitely outnumbered. I heard the doorknob turn to open until the lock caught it. My blood ran cold and I got sick to my stomach when he said, "Shit, it's locked." I guess they went to the bathroom across the closet and noticed my clothes. This must have terrified them because the footsteps grew quieter. It was then that I heard police sirens. Multiple sirens blaring. Never before has a sound brought such relief. That is, until I heard a voice at the door say my name. I opened it and a man in a police vest looked at me and said, "You alright, son?" Outside, cops and cop cars littered the street. My mom was right where I told her to stay. Hysterical, she ran up and wrapped her arms around me and held me for a lifetime. There were a total of 6 men, all middle-aged and all had criminal records. I didn't go to school for the rest of the week. I suffered from nightmares and anxiety attacks when I heard a crack or a knock in the house. I became depressed and by the beginning of December I was diagnosed with PTSD. My depression eventually began to diminish when I started working out. I joined the football team again and my life was finally getting back to normal. Today I'm happy, have a nice job, I married my high school sweetheart and we just had our 2nd child. If there's anything I could tell you from this experience, it's that you should always cherish every moment of every day because you never know when it could be your last. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. This video was very special to me because one of my biggest inspirations, Cry, was able to get on this video with me. To make a long story short, my channel would not exist if it wasn't for his videos. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. So if you liked his narration in this video, please be sure to check his channel out. His channel is mainly focused around gaming stuff, but he does have a playlist called Cry Reads where, well, he reads, just like in this video. So if gaming stuff isn't your thing, I will be linking his Cry Reads playlist in the description, but his channel will be there as well. And it should be on screen right now too. The guy is extremely cool, very talented, and it's extremely odd to have talked to him after years of watching his videos. So thanks to you guys for making that happen. Please head over to his channel and just comment that you appreciate him working with me, or just listen to his stuff and let him know that you enjoy it if you do. I feel like when people voice their opinion on liking when collaborations like this happen, it makes it so things like this can happen more often, and them doing this doesn't go unappreciated. So please go and do that for me if you can. Thank you to everyone who submitted their story for this video. I had some leftover good ones that I will be probably using for future videos. If you have any personal stories you'd like to send in to possibly get read on my channel, please email it to corpsehusbandstories@gmail.com. And if anyone is curious about my health, things are getting better, I think. All my tests that I've taken so far have come back okay. I don't have a blood clot in my leg, which is good, but I still have to do some x-rays on my spine. Please follow me on social media to keep up to date with what's going on with that and just other stuff in general. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Links to Corpse Husband shirts and everything else in the description. I'm still following anybody who buys a shirt and sends me a picture of them in it on social media. Stay safe and have an awesome day. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She had even printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I mean, I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this really creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and then she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say something like, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would just give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name.
Max. Max. Max.
Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story and she was extremely riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and she yelled that she'll slit his fucking throat. That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. I mean, she was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her. And what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as like a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw that one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on. And to my shock, I received 40+ text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly crept into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. When I was 22, I moved 1,000 miles away from my Midwest home to the beautiful foothills of Tennessee. I had a new job, new car, and a nice apartment, but didn't know a soul outside of work. If my phone rang, I expected to hear a faraway family member or my long-distance boyfriend, still in college. This was a landline, no cell phones yet. Despite being very alone, I was managing well with the excitement of all the new things in my life. I had only been living there for about 2 weeks when the unwanted calls started. The first call. A man's friendly voice asked what I was doing. I couldn't place him and thought maybe it was one of my cousins or uncles, as I have a huge extended family. I ask his name. He laughs a little and his tone gets dark, a bit angry. He says,
"You know exactly who this is, darling."
I pause, deciding if this guy simply called the wrong number or is a creep. I choose the former, laugh, and politely tell him he has the wrong number. He then recites my brand new, unlisted, unpublished phone number and my name. What the fuck? An intense chill races through me. I've only ever given my new number to my parents, sister, boyfriend, apartment manager, and employer. I'm new to this city and this state. He does not like it when I tell him he called the wrong number, and he starts yelling at me, then tells me in a much calmer voice the many vulgar things he's going to do to me. I hang up and brush it off. He calls again around 1 a.m. I tell him to fuck himself and hang up. He keeps calling, so I unplug the phone and return to sleep. However, as days go by, the calls continue and escalate. He starts mentioning personal things about me. said he, like the white quilt on my bed. He knew what was in my fridge, said that he was allergic to cats, and I had one, and then he asked me if I was in love with Mary. As I listened to his words, I was standing in my kitchen looking at the calendar taped to the fridge. It had Mary written in pink on the 17th with a heart around it, because Mary is my sister and the 17th is her birthday. I started shaking and crying because suddenly I realized this creep had been in my apartment. I was alone with no friends or family to run to for the night. It was just me versus a creepy mystery man. I didn't sleep much that night. Early the next morning, I talked to the apartment complex manager before heading to work, telling her what happened and that I want the locks changed that day. She gets a weird look on her face, and after a long pause, she says that she knows who's been in my apartment and that it, quote, won't happen again. What? Turns out, she had a creepy, rapey maintenance guy who noticed a young woman moving into an apartment alone and thought I was his new pet. She had the locks changed immediately and promised that she would personally keep the other key. Although the calls stopped, I was paranoid for a year as I came and went from my apartment because I never even knew what this guy looked like. I moved out the moment my lease was up. Only after thinking about it years later did I realize that her weird expression likely meant that it had happened before. Plus, I don't even think she fired him. I regret not calling the cops. I was young and naive. I hope you can learn from this story. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from the Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was traveling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change trains at one point and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform and a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing else there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about the time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared. She asked if he was waiting for the train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be along until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night and offered him a meal and room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less the standard when traveling in this part of the USSR. And great-uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was glad to accept her offer. He took his suitcase and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2, and by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was tired and hungry. They went inside and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some borscht for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realize that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said goodnight, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called out to her, but she didn't answer and he heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and laid on the bed, deciding to just make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep though, he felt the urge to pee, and he got out of bed hoping to find a chamber pot or something he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. Great-uncle John freaked out and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. It was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man. But if he broke the window and tried to get out that way, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows who else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he would get away. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress, and covered it with a blanket. Then he got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs and then toward the room. The lock clicked and the knob turned slowly. John saw someone move towards the bed. Then he heard several thuds. The person had bashed the body on the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. There was silence. Then the person went out of the room and the door was shut again. The footsteps went down the stairs and then there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar, and was able to slowly pry the window open. He didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out, then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind. He landed without too much injury and began to run into a field behind the house towards some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and John was able to get a ride to another village where he would catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what had happened to the authorities since, at the time in the USSR, there was a distinct chance that he would have been the one who got into trouble. He just thanked God he escaped and decided that the next time he traveled to visit relatives, he would take another way. Hey everyone, this is me letting you know that lately I've been having a ton of health problems again. I'm not going to go in depth because this isn't the place for that, but I just wanted you guys to be aware. Things like not being able to sit down for more than 30 minutes at a time will probably affect when videos are able to be released, and how likely you are to have heard some of these stories before. As you could probably tell by this video being late and some of these stories being older because it takes me longer to make a video now. And for all of that I apologize, but I'm doing the best I can. Anyways, like I said, this isn't the place for me to go more in depth, and I may do another live stream in the future where that wouldn't be the focal point, but I would probably update you guys on that. I'm not asking for sympathy, in fact I don't want it, I just wanted to give you guys an explanation. I've gotten past this before and I'll do it again. I just ask that you're understanding and watch my videos as you normally would, as YouTube's current algorithm is already extremely hard to progress in. If you'd like to keep up with my videos and me personally, I have all my social media in the description. I hope you had a good new year and stay safe and have an awesome day. This story is told in the perspective of a female. This is a precautionary tale. I understand that this was all my fault, but even if I can help at least one person by telling my story, it's worth it. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city and they eventually left. I was chatting up a guy, so I decided to stay. We went back to his place and after a while I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I don't know where I am, I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I ordered the Uber, but it's taking forever. Requesting, so I cancel it and I try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like, "Is this the Uber?" And I hop in. That was a mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting, I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're headed on the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive. And we're going at a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there and I'm not, because I'm in the car with the fucking nutcase. I start texting my friend frantically, counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's going to do jack because she's probably drunk too. So I call 911, but I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car, so I've got to do it on the sly. It's been 40 minutes now. I'm terrified, I don't know where I am, and I don't know who this is. We're driving at over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. And this guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone call.
Yo, get off the phone. Who the fuck are you calling? Better not be a snitch.
He's also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. Only because maybe he's been drinking too, or what other drugs does he have in his system? I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on.
Hey, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past... No, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. Yeah, it's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends.
Thank God the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code.
Oh man, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taking a really big bump.
Pretty soon I could see the lights from the cop cars, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point, I don't care if he's onto me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down in my seat just in case things get hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then, once it's safe, they extricate me as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all of this to the officer, I find out that, of this guy's 40-ish years on this earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them, for violent offenses. I want people to learn from my mistakes and, if nothing else, call 911 and stay on the line. I've been reading around this subreddit for a while now, and I'm a pretty keen observer, but through reading accounts of shit on here, I've become a lot more paranoid about certain things. And I think today is the day it paid off. I live in a basement apartment of a somewhat older building, at least 100 years old, I figure. There is no front door entrance to it, only 2 side entrances which tenants can use to reach the laundry room and 1 back door into the building, which only I have the key for, along with the building managers. I've only used the back door a few times, and that was for moving furniture in and out because my side entrances are impossible to use for stuff like that because the stairwell is so steep and the walls are so narrow. Otherwise, I never use the back door. Where I live, it's really snowy at the moment. Lots of ice and other stuff around. 2 days ago, when I left through my usual side door, I noticed that there was a shoveled path to the back of the building, which literally no one has a single reason to do or be back there. There was nothing back there for use. Only a door to get into my apartment, like I said. I thought this was highly suspicious, but I chalked it up to whoever the contractor for snow removal was just trying to be thorough and clearing a path to the back because surely they don't know who uses the back door or not, and they have no reason to. Anyways, ever since the shoveled snow, I've been a bit more suspicious. 3 weeks ago, someone stole my motorcycle from the driveway close to the back door, probably 20 feet away, and it's put me on high alert because obviously I'm fucking pissed and violated that someone went so far as to steal my motorcycle from my driveway under video surveillance. Unfortunately, the cameras were broken / not set up right, so there actually was no recorded footage, only a big camera pointing at you. 2 nights ago, I stayed up literally almost all night reading stories on here because I couldn't sleep as it was. And reading the stories didn't make me feel any better about it. In fact, it's put me on hyper-awareness. So last night, around 10:30 p.m. or so, I let my little dog outside for the last time of the night. I hadn't slept in 36 hours or so, like I said, and I was ready to pack it up. When I came back in from letting my dog out, I took a look at the back door and realized that the deadbolt was disengaged, which sort of unnerved me. The whole thing was highly unusual because there's no need for it to be. And on top of that, there's a key broken off inside the deadbolt, so I have literally no way to lock it at the moment. Alarms in my head are going off on all levels.
I figure there is a chance that it's nothing, but as an extra measure, I put a giant brick in front of the door so that if anyone opened the door, the brick would move and I would know that someone used the door because of it. Then I went to bed. 3 o'clock in the morning comes around and my little dog starts barking her head off. And I think to myself, no one comes down to the basement at 3 a.m. The laundry room is across the hall from my apartment, but no one is doing laundry at 3 a.m. unless they're a meth head, and I heard no laundry being done. I get up and get close to our main door, being very quiet and letting my dog bark. My dog is a dachshund, by the way. Big bark, little bite, and it's noticeable. As I approach my door, I hear the doorknob jiggle a bit, but thankfully I engaged my deadbolt before bed. I am freaking the fuck out about this at this point. Thankfully, I've sort of prepared for this sort of situation in my mind. 1,000 times I've anticipated someone coming down and trying to open my door. Because I live in the city and there are shitty people who do shitty things like break into people's homes. I stand back from the door and yell to the man. I have a Glock in my hands ready to unload with lethal force. The police are on their way. If you attempt to enter my premises, I will kill you. They weren't actually. I was just so amped up I didn't think about it at the time. I then heard footsteps book it out of there, up the side stairs and away. This morning I filed a complaint with my apartment complex demanding that they change the locks and take care of the situation. Lastly, here's a picture of my foot in comparison to one of the footprints they left. I'm posting this in case anyone thinks I'm lying for whatever reason. I just wanted to thank everyone on this sub for sharing your stories. You really saved my ass on this one. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and the back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I only told you this so you would know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a really small girl at this age and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very, very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar, as usual. When you opened my front door, it would put you in the living room, and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that's where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed playing something on a PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it though, and I really didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to go get a drink and told him to stay in the room and that I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway, and that was in front of both the front and the back door because it was behind the living room. I kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened really easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Yeah, good going, Mom. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyway, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on. I start sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I hear a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. I can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I, of course, freeze. I have no one in this town, I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state and my mom is at the bar drunk as hell. I was sitting there, trying to gather my courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I hear my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motion him with my hands to go back into the room and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner, and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man, probably around 6'6" and 300+ pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I slowly, so slowly, snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch and he needed to be very quiet and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here and I knew he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Fuck, my stomach knotted up, the hair on the back of my neck raised, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. Fuck. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I find my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was going on. Hysterical at this point, but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening, when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened and I could no longer remain calm. I fucking lost it and started screaming. And I mean blood-curdling screaming, the kind of screaming that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked and he was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started fucking laughing. "You know I could bust this door down in about 2 seconds, right, little girl?" Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. What I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was him scraping the door with really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. That's when I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground and put his hands up. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and, eventually, silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was way too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there. So being in my hysterical state, I started screaming. Something along the lines of "no, no, please" over and over again, sobbing and shaking. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced we were going to die. Eventually, I calmed myself a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed sobbing hysterically. We had been so scared. It turns out that this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew who this man was, and I didn't. But I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now, doesn't drink, and is now married to a cop. She completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. I still don't know how he didn't get to us or why he didn't just bust the door down to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick the door down. It was super thin. It still creeps me out, and I've had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work third shift, so I'll come home and the doors will be unlocked. It's infuriating because then I have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide in. I have 2 kids and they will never, ever go through what I did. This all took place when I was around 8 or 9. I lived in one of the more poor neighborhoods of Las Vegas and had always been taught the dangers of adults with bad intentions. I had a best friend at the time, Gavin, who apparently had not been taught the same as me. Every single day, Gavin and I would walk home from school. We would go the 3 blocks from the elementary school down to his house and then finally mine at the end of the street. We had been doing this for the better half of the school year without any incidents. However, all it took was one singular moment for that to change. Gavin and I were making our regular trek from school towards Gavin's house, making jokes and exploring what we were going to do that day. It was usually watching Pokemon and reenacting our favorite scenes from the most recent episode. As we turned onto his street, a beat-up old red truck stopped on the road, and a ratty-looking older man with a salt and pepper beard stuck his head out of the grimy-looking vehicle and immediately leaned towards Gavin and I, and in a sickly innocent voice filled to the brim with worry, he asked us, "Would you two help me find my dog? I think she's down the block. She likes to run off on me and I could really use your help." I was skeptical at best. I shook my head and explained that I really had to get home and that my mother was waiting for me, but Gavin promptly said yes and ran towards the truck without a second's hesitation. I was frozen in place. The truck took off and I was left on the side of the road cursing Gavin and wondering what in the hell was I going to do now. As a child, I didn't realize that moment could have been the last I would ever see of my best friend. I didn't put it together that the man was full of evil intentions and just wanted a child or two to do God knows what to them. A dozen thoughts ran through my mind of whether to get Gavin's mother or my own, but at the moment, the very real thought that he was attempting to kidnap us wasn't on my mind. All I know is that he gave me a very bad vibe and I was never to go off with strangers. I had only made it a couple more steps down the road before the unmistakable clunking of the man's red truck came up behind me. I froze in fear before it quickly took off, speeding away and leaving Gavin behind. I was so relieved. I turned and saw my friend clutching $1 to his chest and running towards me, showing off his new reward. I asked him if they had found the dog and Gavin said no, that they drove around the block and that he was given the $1 and dropped back off on our street. We never told our parents and I never saw the man again, but it wasn't until years later I realized that the only reason that man let Gavin go was because I didn't go out there, and an 8-year-old would know what the man looked like and what car he drove if Gavin never came back.
This story is told from an 18-year-old French female's perspective. The story I'm about to tell happened to me almost 2 years ago. A friend of mine, her younger sister, and I had decided to go shopping one afternoon. My friend's mother was nice enough to drop us off at the mall since we were all too young to drive at the time. She said she would pick us up around 6 p.m. and that she would text us where she'd park so that we could meet her. At 6:12, my friend received a text that her mom was waiting for us in her car in the underground parking lot. She then gave us the lot number so that we could find her. It might sound careless for 3 girls to roam around an underground parking lot on their own, but we knew the place well and it wasn't the first time we had to walk through it. My friend and I were in the middle of having coffee when she received the text, and her sister was making a big fuss because she was tired and really wanted to go home. My friend finished her coffee and we didn't want her sister to cause a scene, so I told her it was fine and for them to go and that I would join them in a few minutes. After I finished drinking my coffee and paid the bill, I headed for the parking lot. I should say that this happened in winter, so it was already dark outside and of course, so was the underground parking lot. In addition, it was also late, so the place was completely deserted. However, I knew my friend's mother's car was less than 250 meters away, so it wasn't a long walk. After a few seconds of walking, I heard footsteps getting closer and felt like someone was behind me. I know that underground parking lots are not the safest place to be, especially for a girl, but I decided to stay calm and walked over to a car as if it were my own, thinking that whoever was behind me would walk away. Still, I pulled out my phone and pretended like I was texting when, in fact, I used my phone to take a picture of who was behind me in the reflection of the car window. The picture will be on screen right now. I didn't have enough time to react though when I felt a hand grab around my wrist and pull me to the side. I was thrown down on the hood of the car. I knocked the side of my head in the process and my vision was blurry for a few seconds. I had a metallic taste inside of my mouth and I later found out that with the blow, my teeth had cut inside of my cheek and also split my bottom lip. When I came to my senses, I felt a pair of gloved hands sliding up my calves to my thighs. I've never been in such a scary situation before and I was way too shocked to scream. Now, I haven't mentioned it before, but my father insisted a few months prior that I take self-defense lessons, which I did. So I took a deep breath and repeated in my head, "Don't panic," like a mantra. The guy probably thought he'd knocked me out cold since he wasn't paying much attention to my upper body. I thought about my bunch of keys inside of my jacket. I slowly grabbed it inside my pocket and, like I'd learned, fisted my hand with the keys held in between each of my fingers. Then I quickly pulled my fist out and hit the side of the man's face as hard as I could with it. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to knock him out. The guy had his hood up, covering most of his face, and like I said, it was pretty dark, but I could see that this guy was pretty bulky and obviously stronger than I was. He cursed and pulled a fucking switchblade out of his rear pocket. I really started to panic then. Now, I don't know if it's the adrenaline that made me move fast enough, but I immediately put my arm up to block the blow. However, because I was shaking so badly, I didn't manage to block his arm like I wanted to, and the knife cut through the skin of my arm before flying away. Anger took over fear, and I could honestly feel rage boiling inside of my veins. I tried to kick the guy with my feet, but he had a firm hold on both of my ankles, keeping my legs spread. I was screaming now and struggling as best as I could, trying to scratch the man's face with my nails. Finally, he let go of one of my legs to pin down my wrist. I saw my chance and I took it. I kicked the guy with my free leg, aiming for his kneecap. The guy screamed in pain and fell on his knees. I slid off the hood of the car and punched the guy in the throat. I quickly grabbed my phone, which fell when the guy threw me on top of the car, and ran as fast as I could without looking back towards my friend's mother's car. My friend got out of the car when she saw me and asked what the hell had taken me so long. Obviously, they hadn't heard the screams or seen anything. She stopped yelling when she realized that something was wrong with me. She asked me why I was shaking like a leaf and told me that I looked really pale. And then she grew pale herself when she pointed out the blood running down my arm and my mouth. Her mother got out at that point, and I bent over and threw up against the wheel of the car. They then drove me to the nearest hospital. I didn't say a word during the drive, probably because I was too shocked to say anything. I later reported what happened to the police, but they never found the guy. My photo and the videotapes from the security cameras were useless since we couldn't see the man's face on either of them. I'm now terrified of underground garages, and for some weird reason, I never go out alone without having my set of keys firmly in hand. I still have nightmares about that guy, and what upsets me the most, strangely, is that I'll never be able to put a face on the man that haunts my dreams. A few summers ago, just before the start of my junior year in college, I decided to take a trip to San Francisco. Since I attended my home state's flagship university, I really needed a brief change of scenery. I've always wanted to be in California, which was convenient as one of my friends was interning in San Francisco and offered to let me stay with her. All the details were eventually worked out and I was so excited to go. My friend was still interning while I visited, so she wasn't able to show me around too much, but I had a blast exploring on my own. I spent the majority of my time reading at different parks and taking pictures. She got off work at around 5, so I would head back around then to hang out with her. I always knew I was close to hers when I saw the construction. It was a huge project that required pedestrians to navigate through tunnels. I had been through them many times before, but on that particular day, someone ran up next to me right as we entered the dimly lit passage. He was a larger guy, wearing a white wife beater and blue jeans.
then what will
he asked. None of your business, I responded without looking at him, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't. Hey, you're really pretty. Do you want to go to a party? But before even giving me time to respond, he grabbed my arm. He was pulling me towards the end of the tunnel. I had no idea what awaited me there. His grip was incredibly tight, and he was so much bigger than me, there was no way I could escape by strength alone. Despite being a very tiny person, I didn't have any pepper spray or any self-defense skills. I had never felt so vulnerable in my entire life. My mind was trying to find a way to survive, but then I felt someone else pull my other arm from behind. I thought it was all over, but I looked back and saw that it was a woman around my mom's age, dressed in business attire. Needless to say, I was very confused.
Hey, it's really you. I haven't seen you in so long,
she said as she started sprinting towards the way she came from and pulled me with her. I let out a sigh of relief as I felt his grip loosen. I was ecstatic to exit the tunnel, and when I looked back, he was gone. She told me that she saw the guy go after me and knew that something was wrong. She walked the remaining block with me to my friend's place. I thanked her for everything, and we hugged before I hurried to tell my friend what had just happened. We never even got to exchange names, but I don't know what I would have done without her. It warms my heart to know that there are people out there who have the courage to help others. I actually recently moved to San Francisco, and the construction at the site of the incident has been completed. Even so, I think of her every time I pass by. Okay, so I'm a member of the slam poetry scene. Basically, it's an excuse to get people to listen to performance poetry by adding a competitive element to things. After running through this small scene in my city and wanting to branch out and push my career further, I started visiting places within driving distance that I could go to. This eventually led me to Charlotte, North Carolina. I started at their local team venue where you would compete to be part of a squad that goes to a national competition every year. I was doing really well and was accepted into the local crew pretty quickly. This led to longer stays and features at some of the other venues in the city. I started going to one that was particularly popular and really good for selling CDs. And that's where I met him. He slowly started flirting with me more and more. Although in my loose days, searching for acceptance and love everywhere, something always kept me leery. I would gladly accept the drinks he sent over, smoke his weed with the group in the stock room between sets, and hang out at parties and events. I always had the tickle in my gut warning me not to get close, but over a year or two we continued to become friends. After a while, he started calling and texting me more often, poking me on Facebook daily, sending messages about wanting to be more than friends and that he wanted to find a, quote, snow bunny. Yes, I'm white and he's black, settle down. Again, I never entertained the idea. There was always something gnawing at me. The crazy in his eyes was too hard to miss. I eventually moved to Denver to take a position teaching poetry and to work at a friend's law firm. The second Christmas I was there, I got the call. A friend from Charlotte, North Carolina relayed the following. He had found his white girl and gotten married. They seemed happy at first, but slowly began fighting more and more. It spilled over into the venue, and often they had to be separated by friends from physically attacking one another in public. One friend, later thinking back, remembers the last time she saw them together. Him pushing his wife, followed by her throwing a drink in his face and scratching his neck deep enough to draw blood. My friend told me that after the couple had been dragged away from each other, she sat with him and smoked a cigarette. She said she laughed and jokingly said that you guys are going to kill each other someday. Around Christmas last year, his wife just stopped coming to the bi-weekly events that they both attended regularly. He explained it casually that they were just on a break. Time goes by, no one really questions why they haven't seen or heard from her in a while, thinking maybe she was breaking from the whole scene in order to put distance between herself and her husband. Her parents, however, hadn't heard from their daughter since Thanksgiving dinner. They would call him and he would say everything was fine and just blow them off. This continues until a week after Christmas, knowing their daughter would never miss a holiday without at least one call. So they call the police and send them to the couple's home for a well-body check.
The cops arrive, knock on the door, and they're let in. They ask him where she is, and he replies that she's in the bedroom. He shows them to the room, and there she lay, dead for weeks, rotting in their bed. Oh, and he killed their little dog, too. During this time, he had been attending events, hosting hip-hop nights, even publishing a blog on making a marriage work on one of the local organization's websites. Never once letting on that every night he was going home and sleeping with his murdered wife. The sickest part of all, he has a child from another relationship, a daughter who he gets to celebrate every other holiday with. That Christmas, they opened gifts, had dinner, cuddled up on the couch, and watched movies less than 100 feet from her decaying stepmother. I don't know what would have happened if I'd ever taken him up on his offer to date, but I do know that me and my gut are going to stay on speaking terms, and I will always, always listen.
Number 6. When I was in my early 20s, I worked graveyard at a 24-hour Walmart. I worked in the toy department in the back of the store. I mainly worked alone, and once in a while a friend would help me stock. But unless we were heavy on freight, you basically did your thing and went home at 7 AM. The first time I encountered the man we finally ended up calling Rat Man was around midsummer, 2 years into my job at this store. He would come in around 5 AM and look at all the Hot Wheels cars. He was a collector. There seems to be this group of men in their 50s and 60s who enjoy grabbing up these cars. I normally was in the back tossing my trash and boxes when he would venture in, never really speaking or seeing me, but I would see him come and go. One morning, I happened to be down that aisle when he came for his little 97-cent treasures. He got about 2 inches from my face and introduced himself. I seriously could not tell you what his name was, but he was 5 foot tall, overweight, and in his, I would guess, late 50s. His breath was something that can only be described as rancid rotting garbage mixed with onions or something. He literally had the worst breath, and he would get really close to your face. Our first encounter was just your average creeper feeling you get from someone. Maybe that dude at the bar you don't want hitting on you kind of feeling. I honestly thought nothing of it until he started showing up earlier to try and catch me on the sales floor. He would come up behind me and startle me, try to put his hand on my shoulder or grab a box I was stocking and offer to hold it, in front of his crotch mind you, while I got the items out. I was very young and stupid back then. I didn't know how to handle creeper men, and honestly, I'd only been hit on by a few guys before this that were creepy, to which I would never see them again. I just figured he was a creeper, until one morning he came up to me and asked me out. Oh boy, here it goes. I have to try and blow this guy off and hope he goes away. He came up to me and said, "I noticed that you like to eat at Chinese buffets. You were there yesterday with your friend. I want to take you there. You seem to like the fresh fruit and stir-fry noodles." What the fuck? I never saw this guy at the place, but my friend and I were there for lunch the day before he came in. Was he watching and I just didn't see him? He must have been, and watched what I ate. The place was pretty empty that day as well. My friend and I always went after the lunch groups as she had anxiety and didn't like to eat in really busy places. I just froze and told him no thanks, I'm very busy. I was worried for a bit, but he ended up just leaving me alone for that morning. The next day, I didn't see him in the store, and then I was off for 2 days. That Friday, when I returned to work, sure enough, he was there at 5 AM, looking through the Hot Wheels. I was running behind him and still had boxes to stock. He kept staring at me, so I ended up calling my friend on the intercom phone and asked for her help. She knew what was going on with this guy, so she came over and stocked down the aisle that he was in. I continued working and thought that he had left, so I pushed my cart back to the stockroom, and just as I was about to turn the corner, he came from around the door and grabbed my arm. I twisted back and told him not to touch me, that he scared me. He said he was sorry and was just looking for me. He wanted to know if I'm always off on Wednesday and Thursday, as he came in and I wasn't here. I lied and told him that my days changed often. He then says to me that he didn't think that that was right because every Thursday afternoon I go to HEB, a grocery store, with an older woman in a green car. This guy was stalking me. I did go to the store with my mum on Thursday afternoons. I broke away from this guy and the conversation. The next day, he came in again, walked right up to me and asked me out to lunch. I told him no, I was too busy, not wanting to date, and walked off. There had been a few small conversations early on with him and my friend about how he liked young girls to dance close to him. In general, he was creepy, and we thought pervert. My friend gave him the nickname Rat Man. One morning after work around 10 AM, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. This was long before everyone had a cell phone. I was about to cover up and drift off. I ended up getting out of bed and answering the phone. So this guy came in every once in a while. He'd seen me. Before I could turn to get help, she began to speak to me without turning to look at me. It wasn't after finishing school that day. I sat in my living room watching TV and doing homework. I'm home alone for the next couple of hours, and that was pretty normal.
Number 4.
Back in 2006, I was a sophomore in high school and was kind of the popular outcast. I had lots of friends, but never really fit in with any cliques in particular. So I tried to surround myself with people who were in similar situations as me. The beginning of that year brought in many new students, but one stood out to me and I knew that we just had to be friends. I won't be using real names here, so let's call him Derek. Derek was tall and quite bulky, but in a somewhat muscular way. He wasn't built per se, but he definitely had some muscle tone. He was one of the bad boy types. He and his mum were seated in front of my best friend Anne and I during our orientation, and we couldn't help but notice his short mohawk type of hairstyle, and his many, many tattoos, which was kind of out of the ordinary for my rich kid stuck up high school. So naturally, we had to befriend him. He quickly became the bad boy that every girl in the school wanted, and he even grabbed the attention of some of the older girls in the school. One such girl in particular really had her eye on him. We'll call her Ashley. She was a year older than us, and a pretty popular girl. She was kind of the stoner loner type of girl, but one that at the same time had tons of friends, and always had at least one guy by her side. Derek definitely had his eye on her too, but at the same time, she had a boyfriend. Next thing we know, her and Derek had begun dating, and we were all pretty excited for them. Well, everyone aside from Jason, that was. He didn't like Derek to begin with, but when he stole Ashley from him, something in Jason snapped. He was a taller, lanky guy, didn't have much muscle tone to him at all, and was pretty skinny if I remember correctly.